Good evening, and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we are diving into two stories that, on the surface, might seem unrelated, but together, they paint a picture of a world racing to hand over the keys of knowledge itself to artificial intelligence.
And I'm Maya Clarity. Tonight, we're talking about a biological AI model that has learned to read and write the language of life itself, trained on 9 trillion base pairs of DNA. And we're looking at a comprehensive analysis of how AI is reshaping physics education from the ground up. 2 domains. 1 pattern. Stay with us.
Let me set the stage here. We are living through what historians will likely call the Great Delegation, the moment humanity decided that its most fundamental sciences, from the code of life to the laws of physics, should be interpreted, modeled, and increasingly designed by machine intelligence. The question we need to ask tonight is, who controls these systems, and what are the consequences when they fail?
That's exactly right, Alex. And what makes tonight's story so compelling is the scale. We're not talking about AI writing your emails or generating cute images. We're talking about AI that can design genomes, the actual instruction set for living organisms, and AI that is fundamentally changing how the next generation of scientists learns to think about the physical world.
So buckle up. We've got a lot to unpack. Let's start with the biggest story first.
Breaking news out of the world of computational biology. A team led by researchers at the Institute, along with collaborators at Stanford University, UC Berkeley, and other institutions, has published a landmark paper in Nature describing EVO2, a biological foundation model that the researchers say represents a new frontier in genomic AI.
And Maya, this is not a small incremental step. According to the paper published in Nature on March 4, 2026, EVO2 was trained on approximately 9.3 trillion DNA base pairs. To put that in context, the human genome contains roughly 3.2 billion base pairs. This model has ingested the equivalent of nearly 3,000 human genomes worth of sequence data, spanning bacteria, archaea, eukaryotes, and even phages, viruses that infect bacteria. Every domain of life on Earth.
Let's break down what this model actually does, because the implications are staggering. EVO2 is what researchers call a biological foundation model. It operates at the single nucleotide level, meaning it processes DNA one letter at a time, A, T, C, G, across sequences that can stretch up to 1 million base pairs in length. That context length is critical. It means the model can see and reason about entire genes, regulatory regions, and even large stretches of chromosomal architecture all at once.
And here's where it gets truly remarkable and, frankly, a little unsettling. According to the Nature paper, EVO2 doesn't just predict what a DNA sequence does. It can generate novel sequences, essentially writing new genetic code. The researchers demonstrated that the model can design functional CRISPR systems, predict the effects of genetic mutations on protein function, and even generate DNA sequences for entire organelles. We're talking about mitochondria-scale genomic design, Maya.
The research team, led by scientists including Patrick Su at the Institute and colleagues at UC Berkeley and Stanford, showed that EVO2 outperforms existing specialized models across a wide range of benchmarks. And crucially, it does this as a generalist. Previous genomic AI models were typically trained on narrow slices of biology, maybe just protein sequences, or just human genomes. EVO2 was trained on a curated dataset called Open Genome 2, which spans all 3 domains of life plus bacteriophages.
Now, I want to talk about who built this and what their stated intentions are, because it matters. The Institute, which led this work, is a relatively new research organization founded in 2022 by Patrick Collison, the CEO of Stripe, along with biologist Patrick Su and biochemist Silvana Konerman. The Institute's model is interesting. It's designed to give researchers long-term, curiosity-driven freedom, outside the traditional grant cycle. And critically, the researchers have released the EVO2 model weights and the Open Genome 2 dataset openly.
That open release is significant, and it cuts both ways. On one hand, it democratizes access to an incredibly powerful tool. Academic labs around the world, including those in lower-income countries, can now use a state-of-the-art genomic AI without paying licensing fees to a pharmaceutical giant. That is genuinely important for equity in science.
But on the other hand, and this is where the investigative lens has to sharpen, you've just put a tool capable of designing novel biological sequences into the hands of anyone with a GPU cluster. The paper itself acknowledges this dual-use concern. The researchers write about safety evaluations they conducted, but let's be honest, the biosecurity implications of a model that can generate functional genetic elements from scratch are profound and, in many ways, unprecedented.
And Alex, let's talk about the benchmarks, because the performance numbers tell a story about where this technology is heading. The paper reports that EVO2 achieves state-of-the-art results in predicting variant effects, meaning it can look at a mutation in a gene and predict whether that mutation will be harmful, neutral, or beneficial. This has enormous implications for clinical genetics and drug development.
Right. If you're a pharmaceutical company, a model like this could dramatically accelerate your pipeline. Instead of spending years and millions of dollars on experimental screening, you could use EVO2 to computationally narrow your search space. The question is, who captures that economic value? The model weights are open, but the computational resources needed to run a model at this scale are not trivial. We're talking about a model with roughly 40 billion parameters. You need serious infrastructure.
So the real beneficiaries, despite the open release, are likely to be the well-resourced players, large biotech firms, well-funded academic centers, and the cloud computing providers who sell the GPU time. The democratization argument is real, but it has limits. A researcher at a small university in sub-Saharan Africa has access to the weights, yes, but does she have access to the hundreds of thousands of dollars in compute needed to actually run inference at scale?
That's a critical point. And it connects to a broader pattern we see across AI development. The models are open, but the infrastructure is concentrated. And the concentration of compute is, in many ways, the new monopoly. You don't need to own the algorithm if you own the data centers.
There's another dimension here that I think deserves scrutiny. The paper describes EVO2's ability to generate genomic sequences for organelles, specifically mitochondrial genomes. Mitochondria are the energy-producing structures in our cells, and they have their own small genomes. The fact that an AI can now generate plausible mitochondrial genome sequences raises questions about synthetic biology applications that go far beyond traditional genetic engineering.
We're entering territory where the line between discovery and design blurs completely. Historically, biologists studied what nature built. Then, with CRISPR and other gene editing tools, they learned to modify what nature built. Now, with EVO2, we're looking at the possibility of designing biological systems from scratch, not by tweaking existing genomes, but by generating entirely new ones based on patterns learned from the totality of life on Earth.
And the regulatory framework for this simply does not exist. Current biosafety regulations were built for a world where genetic engineering meant cutting and pasting known sequences. They were not designed for a world where an AI can generate novel sequences that have never existed in nature but are predicted to be functional. The governance gap here is enormous, and it's widening with every new model release.
The Nature paper does address some safety measures the team implemented, including red teaming exercises and evaluations of whether the model could generate sequences associated with known pathogens. But these are self-imposed guardrails by a responsible research team. There is no regulatory body currently empowered to evaluate and approve or restrict the release of biological foundation models of this power.
And that brings us to the fundamental tension at the heart of this story. The science is extraordinary. The potential for medical breakthroughs, for understanding genetic diseases, for developing new therapies, it's immense. But the governance infrastructure is lagging years behind the technology, and the people building these systems are essentially regulating themselves.
We'll come back to those themes. But first, let's turn to our second story tonight, which takes us from the code of life to the laws of physics, and the classrooms where the next generation of scientists is being shaped.
A new bibliometric analysis published on AR14, paper number 2603.03348, examines the intersection of artificial intelligence and physics education. The researchers conducted a systematic analysis of 138 core publications from the Web of Science Core Collection database, covering the period from 2021 to 2025. Using visualization tools called VIOS Viewer and SiteSpace to map the intellectual landscape.
Now, Maya, I know what some of our viewers might be thinking. A bibliometric analysis doesn't sound as dramatic as an AI that can write DNA. But stay with me here, because what this paper reveals is actually quite alarming when you read between the lines. It documents a fundamental shift in how physics is being taught, and the implications for scientific thinking are profound.
The study identifies several key trends. First, there has been a significant acceleration in publications at the intersection of AI and physics education since 2021, with the sharpest increase occurring after 2023, which, not coincidentally, corresponds to the explosion of large language models and generative AI tools into mainstream use.
The researchers found that the dominant themes in the literature cluster around several areas: automated assessment and grading, intelligent tutoring systems, natural language processing for physics problem solving, and perhaps most significantly, the use of AI to generate physics content, including exam questions, lab simulations, and explanatory materials.
Let's unpack what that means in practice. We're talking about a world where the physics homework your kid brings home might have been generated by an AI, graded by an AI, and the feedback delivered by an AI tutor. The human instructor is increasingly becoming a supervisor of automated systems rather than a direct teacher.
And here's where the investigative angle gets sharp. The bibliometric analysis reveals that the research in this field is heavily concentrated in a small number of countries, primarily the United States, China, and a handful of European nations. The voices and pedagogical approaches of the Global South are dramatically underrepresented in this literature.
That matters because the AI tools being developed for physics education embed particular assumptions about how physics should be taught, what problems are important, and what constitutes understanding. If those tools are built primarily by and for Western and Chinese educational contexts, they risk becoming a new form of intellectual monoculture when deployed globally.
The paper also highlights a concerning gap between the technology development and educational research on effectiveness. Many of the publications describe new AI tools and systems, but far fewer rigorously evaluate whether students actually learn physics better with these tools. We're building the plane while flying it, and we don't have strong evidence that the passengers are arriving at their destination.
One of the most striking findings is the emergence of what the researchers identify as a hot topic cluster around AI-generated content in physics assessment. This is the area of fastest growth in the literature, and it raises immediate questions about academic integrity. If AI can generate novel physics problems, it can also solve them. The arms race between AI-powered cheating and AI-powered detection is already well underway.
But the deeper issue, Maya, goes beyond cheating. It goes to the heart of what physics education is supposed to accomplish. Physics isn't just about getting the right answer to a problem set. It's about developing physical intuition, a deep, often nonverbal understanding of how the world works. You develop that intuition by struggling with problems, making mistakes, building models in your head, and refining them through experience.
Exactly. And the concern raised implicitly by this literature review is that AI tutoring systems, however sophisticated, may optimize for the wrong outcome. They can teach students to produce correct answers efficiently. But efficiency in problem solving is not the same thing as understanding. Richard Feynman didn't become Feynman by getting fast answers. He became Feynman by thinking deeply and unusually about physical systems.
The bibliometric data also reveals an interesting power dynamic. The most cited works in this field tend to come from computer science departments, not physics departments. The people shaping how physics is taught with AI are, increasingly, not physicists, they're AI researchers who see education as an application domain for their technology.
That's a pattern we see across AI adoption in many fields. The technologists build the tools, and the domain experts, the physicists, the biologists, the educators, are expected to adapt. But education is not a neutral space. It's where we form the minds that will do the science of the future. If we get this wrong, the consequences compound across generations.
Let's talk about who benefits from the AIification of physics education. The most obvious beneficiaries are the edtech companies building and selling these tools. The global edtech market is projected to exceed $600 billion by 2030, and AI-powered educational tools are the fastest-growing segment.
Companies like Coursera, Khan Academy, and newer AI-native startups are racing to deploy AI tutors across STEM education. And the economics are compelling for cash-strapped educational institutions. An AI tutor doesn't need a salary, doesn't get tired, and can serve thousands of students simultaneously. For a university administrator looking at budget shortfalls, the temptation to replace human teaching assistants with AI systems is enormous.
But the losers in that equation are the early career scientists, the graduate students and postdocs who traditionally served as teaching assistants and, in the process, deepened their own understanding of physics. Teaching is not just a service obligation. It's a critical part of scientific training. When we automate it away, we're not just changing how undergraduates learn. We're changing how scientists develop.
The analysis also surfaces a geographic tension. AI-powered physics education tools developed in wealthy nations are being exported to developing countries, often through online platforms, without adequate consideration of local educational contexts, languages, or pedagogical traditions. This is educational technology colonialism in a new form.
And there's virtually no regulatory framework governing the deployment of AI in education. In the United States, the Department of Education has issued guidance documents, but nothing with the force of law. In Europe, the AI Act classifies educational AI as high risk, but the implementation details are still being worked out. Meanwhile, the technology is already in classrooms.
So to summarize the state of play, we have AI tools for physics education that are proliferating rapidly, that are being built primarily by computer scientists rather than physicists, that are being deployed without strong evidence of educational effectiveness, and that are governed by a regulatory framework that barely exists. Sound familiar?
It sounds exactly like the genomic story we just covered. And that's no coincidence. Let's connect these dots.
Here's the synthesis, and this is where tonight's show comes together. We've covered two stories, an AI that can read and write the language of life, and a transformation of how we teach the fundamental science of the physical world. The common thread is this: in both cases, we are delegating our most foundational forms of knowledge to artificial intelligence systems, and we are doing so faster than we can build the institutions to govern that delegation.
Think about what these two stories represent together. Evo2 embodies AI's growing power to do science, to analyze, predict, and even create at the frontier of biological knowledge. The AI in physics education story represents AI's growing role in shaping scientists, in determining how the next generation learns to think about the natural world.
When you control both the tools of discovery and the methods of training, you control the entire scientific pipeline. And right now, that control is concentrating in the hands of a remarkably small number of institutions, primarily elite Western universities and the technology companies that provide the computational infrastructure.
The ARC Institute deserves credit for releasing Evo2 openly. But openness of model weights does not equal openness of power. The compute required to train models like Evo2 is available only to organizations with access to tens of millions of dollars in GPU resources. The knowledge may be open, but the capacity to generate new knowledge is not.
And in education, the same dynamic plays out. The AI tools are often free or low cost for students, but the companies building them capture enormous value from user data, from institutional contracts, and from the network effects of becoming the default platform for physics instruction. Free at the point of use does not mean free of power asymmetries.
There's a deeper philosophical concern here that I think we need to name directly. Both genomics and physics education are fields where understanding, not just performance, matters. An AI can generate a functional DNA sequence without understanding biology. An AI tutor can guide a student to the correct answer without either of them understanding physics in the way a human physicist does.
And if we're not careful, we could build a world where the AI does the understanding and the humans just operate the tools. That's not science. That's button pushing. The entire Enlightenment project was built on the idea that human beings can comprehend the natural world through reason and observation. If we outsource that comprehension to machines, what are we left with?
I want to be clear, we're not anti-technology on this show. Evo2 could help us cure genetic diseases. AI tutoring could make quality physics education accessible to millions who currently don't have it. These are real, important possibilities.
But possibility is not inevitability. The question is not whether these technologies can do good. It's whether the institutions, incentives, and power structures surrounding them are oriented toward that good. And right now, the evidence suggests they're oriented primarily toward concentration of capability, acceleration of deployment, and deferral of governance.
We need regulatory frameworks that can keep pace with biological AI, frameworks that don't just rely on the goodwill of researchers, but that create binding obligations around safety evaluation, access equity, and dual-use risk management. The fact that we're relying on self-regulation for a tool that can generate novel genetic sequences should alarm every one of our viewers.
And in education, we need to insist that AI tools are evaluated by educators and scientists, not just by the companies selling them. We need rigorous, independent studies of whether AI tutoring actually produces better physicists, not just better test scores. And we need to protect the human elements of scientific training, the mentorship, the struggle, the slow development of intuition that AI cannot replicate.
The pattern across both stories is clear. The technology is racing ahead. The governance is lagging behind. And the gap between them is where harm happens, where biosecurity risks go unmanaged, where educational quality erodes invisibly, and where power concentrates in the hands of those who control the compute.
Our viewers need to understand that these are not separate technology stories. They are chapters in the same story, the story of whether humanity will maintain meaningful agency over its most important forms of knowledge, or whether we'll hand that agency over to systems we don't fully understand, built by institutions we don't fully trust, governed by frameworks that don't fully exist.
So what can you do? First, pay attention. These stories don't get the coverage they deserve because they're technical, because they're complex, and because the people who benefit from the status quo prefer that you don't look too closely. Second, demand accountability from your elected representatives. Ask them what they're doing about AI biosafety. Ask them what standards they're setting for AI in education.
Third, support independent science. Organizations like the ARC Institute are trying a different model, long-term, curiosity-driven research with open publication. That model needs to be the norm, not the exception. And fourth, if you're an educator, a scientist, a student, insist on understanding. Don't let the efficiency of AI tools replace the depth of human comprehension. The shortcut isn't always the right path.
We started tonight by talking about the great delegation, humanity's decision to hand its deepest knowledge over to artificial intelligence. That delegation is not inherently good or bad. It's a choice, and like all choices, it has consequences.
The question is whether we'll make that choice consciously, with eyes open and institutions ready, or whether we'll sleepwalk into it, dazzled by the capabilities and blind to the risks. At Truth Report, we believe you deserve to make that choice with full information. That's why we're here.
For Truth Report, I'm Alex Truth. Stay curious, stay critical, and never stop asking who benefits.
And I'm Maya Clarity. We'll see you next time. Good night.